Welcome. Today we'll be discussing how to write effective job search correspondence, including how to develop a resume and a cover letter that will get noticed by recruiters and that will be tailored to the job that you're seeking. The first thing you want to do is select the content that supports your qualifications and matches the job description. So it doesn't matter if you have the most qualifications in the world, if it's not tailored to what the job is asking you to do, then it's not going to be effective. So you want to basically cross-reference each job posting with your resume and tailor it. So I usually pull up the job description for the position I'm applying for right next to my resume and go one by one with what they're asking you to do and see what do I have as far as my qualifications, skills, education goes that matches what they're asking for. So that's the first thing you'll do. The second thing you want to do is consider organizing it by the order of importance. So when you read a paper, you always start up at the top, right? You go from the top down. It's the same thing with employers when they're looking at your resume. They're going to start up at the top and then they're going to go down. So you want to make sure that you have the most important things up at the top of your resume and on the first page of your resume because that is what they will see first. The third thing is you want to make sure you're using professional wording, you're integrating job-specific terms, and your verbs are action-oriented. So you don't want to include a bullet statement that sounds very generic. You want to make sure you're using professional wording, you're getting specific, and you're including terms that are related to the job or the field that you're applying for. And then we'll talk about this a little bit further on, but you're going to be including verbs for all of your bullets, and you want to make sure that those verbs are action-oriented. And the last thing, you want to avoid repetition, and we mean this in a couple of different ways. So you want to avoid repetition in the action verbs that you use. You want to avoid repetition in the kinds of skills you're listing. You want to maximize your resume and be very intentional with what you're putting on there. So if you went to Governor State University, for example, for both your bachelor's degree and your master's degree, you don't have to put the words Governor State University twice. That's wasting paper and that's wasting space where you can be putting something else on your resume that's more valuable. So you want to avoid repetition at all costs. And short phrases here with your resume are a must, meaning you don't want to be putting paragraphs on your resume. Recruiters don't have enough time to be looking at paragraphs, and they're not going to want to read through them. So chances are they're not going to be able to pull up the job qualifications that you're trying to show them because they're going to skip over them by having to search for what skills you have through the paragraphs instead of including short phrases in the bullet format. Before you even start to apply for jobs and really start with the main component of tweaking your resume, you want to figure out a few things. You want to figure out what positions exactly are you applying for. This is going to help you on how you want to create your resume and how you want to tailor it. So you want to have a running list of what is it that you're seeking. Okay, so know what you're looking for, and then also what are your main qualifications? And then how can you meet the needs for the positions that you're applying for? What skills and experience and education do you have that will be of value for the position that you were applying for? What are your career goals? So knowing what's the job that you're applying for, how does this align with your short-term and your long-term career goals? Chances are employers are going to be asking those questions. So you want to have a good understanding of this ahead of time. So be intentional and deliberate with the types of positions you're seeking, making sure that they align with your career goals and that you can discuss that too as an employer. You want to start to think about what your professional identity is and start building that as well. And then you always want to be asking yourself, how can you help the company? What is it that you'll be bringing to this team or that you'll be bringing this to department that will be of value to the company? And think of yourself in more of a unique way too, like pull together all of your unique qualifications, your unique experience with your education and ask yourself, what is it about you and the skills and the experience that you have that will be able to help this company in a very specific, noticeable way? So I'm sure most of you have heard about the one-page rule, where you must absolutely keep your resume to one page. Now, there is some truth to this. However, there's definitely exceptions to this rule. You don't want to be cutting out crucial experiences or qualifications that you have just to keep your resume to one page. You also don't want to be changing your font size to a size 6 or an 8 or something that's very difficult to read to keep your resume to one page. So if you have enough valuable experience and qualifications and it makes sense for you to have 2 pages, it's okay. You just don't want to go on to 2 to 3 pages because of including a bunch of information that's not relevant or that you may not need, because recruiters are just not spending a lot of time looking at your resume. So you want to make sure everything that you put on it is important and relevant to the job that you're applying for. Your resume should be made to stimulate interest, but not overwhelm the person reading it with information. So you want to make it easy to read, you want to make it visually pleasing, and you want to make sure that when you are creating your resume and putting down your information, you're not including your autobiography. You're not putting personal information in there. You're not putting things like your age, your ethnicity. No personal information needs to be included on your resume in that way. And then as far as your experience goes, 10 to 15 years will be sufficient. So meaning you don't have to go beyond 10 to 15 years back. So if you have work experience that was 20, 25 years ago, you're not going to be including that on your resume, because you want to keep your resume with the most relevant work experience. So anything beyond 10 to 15 years, you can leave off your resume. So what exactly do you include on your resume? The first thing you're going to want to include up at the top of your resume is your contact information. So this means putting your full name, your address, your phone number, your email, and your LinkedIn URL if you have one as well. I also want to mention here that if you have an email that's old and that's not professional, you want to make sure that you're creating a new email address that is professional, because this is going to be something that not only are you including on your resume, but it's going to be how recruiters will start contacting you. Then after your contact information, you typically are going to put your education section. This is where you're listing the schools you've attended, the location, so their city and the state, and then the month and year that you graduated. You don't have to put in, and you shouldn't, in fact, put in every single school you've ever gone to. So if you went to a few different colleges and you were just transferring, don't put the schools on there that you haven't earned degrees from. So if you earned a degree from the school, you could put it on there. If you didn't earn it and you simply transferred from one university to another university, then you do not need all those colleges listed. And you want to keep in mind, for everything you put on your resume, underneath each section, you're actually going to be starting with the most recent first and then going back. So it'll be in reverse chronological order, meaning with your education, you want to start with your current education, your most recent education. So say you're working on your master's degree now, you want to put the name of the school, the city, the state, month and year that you'll graduate, name your degree for your master's degree, and then underneath that, you'll put your bachelor's degree. So it's always starting with your most recent first. And then for your GPA, it's not required that you have this on your resume. However, if you have a very high GPA, so typically anything above a 3.0, you would want to include that into this section as well. And then if you had honors or you're on the dean's list, this is another area where you can put that into. The next section typically is your experience section. So for your experience, you always want to list the company or the organization's name, the location, which is the city and the state, your title, and then your dates of employment. You don't need your exact dates, but I would put the month and year that you started and then the month and year that you ended that position, or if you're still currently in that position, then it would be just present. So it's always company name, city, state, dates, title underneath, and then underneath that, you want to put bullets describing what you did in each one of your positions. And this is what really should be the bulk of your resume, is giving those examples, showing what you did in each one of your work experiences or volunteer experiences, so that this way employers can see, okay, this person has done something that's similar, or they've done something that has given them the skills that will be useful for this position. And then we'll talk more about what your bullets will look like in the next slides, but I want you guys to know first off that you should always be using action verbs when you're describing your duties, and that these action verbs, their tense should be according to when you did the job, meaning if it's a present tense job, then your verb should be present tense, and if it's a past tense job, your verb should be past tense. So where should your education go? Above or below your experience section? This is one of the typical questions I usually get when I see students who I'm working on the resumes with. So The correct answer is it really just depends. It depends on which is stronger, your education or your work experience section, and then how much relevant work experience you have. So I would say typically most students who are recent graduates or about to graduate will usually have their education go first because your education is going to be stronger at this point, unless you are someone who went back to school later on in life and your experience is relevant to what you're applying for. Um, so 9 times out of 10, I find that the students that I work with usually don't have a lot of experience in their field yet. So education will go up at the top. But if you are in that percentage where you actually have a lot of work experience in your field, and now you're just starting to go back and work on your degree, then you might choose to put your experience section first. So it's all based on what is strong, which is stronger, and what's going to be most important for an employer to see. So you want to think, kind of get in the mind of the recruiter and think about what would be most relevant and most important for them to know for when they're hiring for the position that they just posted. So place the strongest, most relevant section closest to the top of the page. You might be wondering what work qualifies and what you should actually be including on your resume, if you should be including every single job you've ever had. You won't need to include every single job you've ever had, but you will want to list the ones that you've done for more than 6 months, the ones that show that you've done something that's either similar to the job that you're applying for, or that can show that you've learned skills that will be useful for the job that you're applying for. And then you don't want to think, or you don't want to forget about other types of positions you had besides your paid position. So volunteer positions that you had, different assistantships, internships, any activities that are using the same duties or qualifications for the position that you're trying to get is useful to have on your resume. So it doesn't matter whether it was a part-time job or whether you volunteered once a month. If it shows any kind of relevant experience or skills, you want to list that on your resume. So there are several other things you can include on your resume for content besides your education, your experience section. So you'll see here a few of those options. One of the other possibilities to put on would be a relevant coursework section. I recommend this a lot of times to students who are recent graduates, who don't have a lot of work experience in their field yet, or who are trying to get their first internship. And you want to show, okay, even though you don't have the experience yet, you have some knowledge in what you are trying to get into, in the field that you're trying to get into. So you want to display the classes that you've taken. The nice thing about this section too, of course, is that you can tailor it to whatever it is that you're applying for. So if there are certain classes that are more applicable to one internship or one position, then you could change those out for different classes for the different position, a different position that you're applying for. So relevant coursework is a section that you could potentially add, and usually you would just add this in right underneath your education section. You can also add in an award section if you've received numerous either academic awards or any kind of award regarding leadership or demonstrating some kind of skills that would be necessary for the job. You can also include in different leadership positions. You can add in a technology skills section. So if you have specific computer skills that you want to list, like say you're proficient in Microsoft Excel, or you know different systems, especially as it relates to your field, or whatever it is that you're applying for. If you're bilingual, you might add in a languages section. So the other content areas that you include are going to largely depend on what you specifically have. Obviously, not every person is going to have several different languages to put on their resume, or not every person has had numerous extracurricular activities that they're going to add on your resume. So the education experience is pretty general to put on your resume, and then adding in these further content ideas, it really just depends on what you have and what's going to be most valuable for whatever it is that you're applying for. I mentioned earlier that we would go into more detail on how to create your bullets, so that's what I want to do right here. So with your bullets, you always want to be answering the journalistic questions. So you start with a verb, like I mentioned, and then you're going to try to answer these questions: the who, what, where, why, when, and how questions. So for example, with whom did you work? What duties did you perform? Where did your job fit into the organization? What goals were you trying to accomplish? What timelines were you working under? And what procedures did you follow? The reason for using this approach is because it helps you to get as specific as possible, but then also keeping those bullets concise at the same time. So you want to make sure that you're getting specific, but you're not just going on and including information that's not necessary. So this approach helps you to get specific, but in a way that is still including information that employers would like to see. Here's a list of a variety of different action verbs that you can use. Obviously, this isn't the entire list of action verbs you can use. You can clearly use any kind of action verb that you would have that's even not on this list. However, this will give you a good amount to start off with because you don't want to use the same action verb over and over. So you want to make sure that you're varying your action verbs as much as you possibly can. Here's an example of the journalistic approach at work. So before using the journalistic approach, someone might come in and their bullet point would be planned activities. There's nothing innately wrong with that bullet. However, it's very boring and you don't really get a good idea what that person actually did in that job. But you can see with taking that bullet that they have and using the journalistic approach and coming up with the after bullet that we have listed, it becomes much more specific. So after using the journalistic approach, it becomes planned weekly art, craft, and physical activities for students with disabilities ranging from 5 to 15 years of age. So you can see how much more information that gives the employer, the recruiter who's looking over the resume. They have a lot more information gathered just from that one bullet. So you can imagine the kind of impact it could have from using this approach on every single one of your bullets and just how much more information and value you can be adding to your resume. You might notice that there will be things that you want to include on your resume that seem understated. So you want to try to take those responsibilities and see your experiences as a professional would. So you go to the why behind what you're doing. An example of this is what we have here. So an understated version would be performed administrative duties. If you're thinking about that as a professional would be, you would be seeing it as oversaw and maintained daily clerical operations to enhance and support a cohesive and efficient office environment. So this person thought into why am I doing what I'm doing? And it's overall to enhance and support a cohesive and efficient office environment. So they looked at it as their manager or their boss would be looking at what they did in that role. When you're choosing what to include and what not to include on your resume, you want to make sure that you're thinking in terms of your field and including the qualifications that are most relevant. So you'll begin to learn what are the buzzwords or the keywords that for the positions that you're applying for by going to the different jobs you're applying for and reading over their job descriptions. What words or terms do you see continuously coming up? Those are going to be the buzzwords that are used for your field. So it's going to be different for each field, but the more you look at different job postings, the more you're going to start to learn about the buzzwords that are in your field. So far, when we've been talking about resumes, I've been mostly referring to the chronological resume, which you can see to the left. There is another kind of resume that you can use that I wanted to make sure to bring up, and that's called the chronofunctional resume. So with this kind of a resume, you're going to focus more on your professional highlights and your professional skills. You'll see it more often use the chronological resumes, and most recruiters are more familiar with the chronological resumes. However, a chronofunctional resume can be very useful if you have different gaps in your work history, or say you haven't been in work for a long time and you want the focus to be on the specific skills you have versus the length of time. So this is just another way and another format that you can create your resume and market your skills. I wanted to touch on a few things about the design of your resume. So the first thing I want to make sure that you know is you don't want to use a font size that's any smaller than 10 or any larger than 12. So you want to stick within that realm. Even a size 10 at times can be pretty small, so it's just depending on the type of font, and you really need to make sure that it's easy to read. The other thing is you want to stick to more of a basic font, and then you want to use that same font type throughout your entire resume. So make sure that your font type doesn't change up throughout your resume and stick to something like Times New Roman, Arial, or any of the ones that are more traditional. You want to avoid italic, script, and underline words. It's not that you can't use italics or you can't underline words. You just don't want to do all of those things at once. So make sure that you're bolding and you're italicizing, but you're limiting it to not doing all three of those things at once, and then making sure that you're consistent when you are doing those things. So if you decide to bold one of your position titles, make sure you're bolding all of your position titles. You don't want to use form fields, boxes, graphics, shading, and you don't want to put your resume on a template. So that's probably one of the most common things I see is students will come in and they'll have their resume on this pre-made template. You want to pull it off the template and use just a plain Microsoft Word document, because the template is automatically going to put your text in text boxes. It's going to put different graphics on there, and it's really going to be utilizing a lot of space for things like the shading and the graphics in the different text boxes versus allowing as much room as possible for your content, which is going to be what's most important. For the paper, you want to use a resume quality paper. You want to use usually just white or off-white, so no fancy colors with that. You don't want to fasten the pages with staples or a clip. So if you have your resume and it is multiple pages, make sure that you're still printing on one side of the paper. So don't print it, do a double-sided print when you have one page of your resume on the front side and then the other page on the back side. You want two separate papers, not fastened. And then if you must mail your resume, which isn't as common but can still happen, you'll want to make sure that you don't fold it up, that you do put it in a large envelope and then mail it. There are some things that you definitely shouldn't include in your resume. So first off, you don't want to include personal pronouns like I and my. It's your resume, your name is up at the top, so that'll already be assumed. You don't need to waste space by including the I and the my and forming complete sentences when it's unnecessary. You don't need title of resume up at the top. Employers are going to know that it's your resume. You're not going to be including your picture on your resume. That's something that you can put in your LinkedIn account, but you do not want to include your photograph on your resume. You don't want any kind of personal information. So no age, no gender, no marital status, race, ethnicity, religion, political affiliation, etc. No personal information belongs on your resume. No TOEFL scores or immigration status. No general hobbies unless it's an activity that's reflecting a skill that's related to the position. You don't need to include reasons for leaving your previous positions. You simply put what that position was and the dates, but you don't put the reason why you left. You don't have to put the date the resume was completed or when you were working on your resume. You don't have to put English underneath language skills because that'll be assumed. And you don't want to include your salary history or requirements. It's not enough just to have a solid resume. You also want to make sure that you're creating a cover letter that's tailored to each position that you apply for. So yes, you will need more than one. You can't create a general cover letter and then just send it off to every job you apply for. So you might be wondering, why include a cover letter when you're already attaching your resume for the job application and your resume shows all of your qualifications? For one, the cover letter will help you to introduce yourself and your resume to the employer. It gives you a space to state the position you're applying for, and it gives you the opportunity to detail why you're a good match for that specific organization and position. And lastly, it provides a sample of your written communication skills. So employers aren't really going to see your written communication skills anywhere else besides your cover letter. And that's typically pretty important in most jobs because in most positions, you're going to be sending emails or you're going to be writing different memos or having different kind of written correspondence. So providing a sample of your written communication skills is going to be valuable for them. Your cover letter should really focus on answering these two primary questions. Why are you the right fit for the position? And how will you add value to that specific organization? So it's still not going to be about you and all of your goals and why you really want this position. You can touch on why you want to work for that organization, but at this point in your cover letter, you're still selling yourself. You still want to describe what are all the reasons and what kind of skills you have that would make you valuable for them. Why should they hire you? You'll have three main sections that you want to include in your cover letter. The first one is your opening paragraph, which will be one of the shorter paragraphs in your cover letter. And the Purpose of this paragraph is just to state the name of the position that you're applying for and to give a general statement that will introduce your body of the paragraph. Then in your body paragraph, this is where you're going to have the most valuable things. You're going to highlight your qualifications, your experiences. You're going to be selling yourself as a competent person to complete that job. So you might have 1 to 2 body paragraphs. Typically, you want to include the specific examples from either your jobs and or something you did in your classes. Whatever things you think from your education or your experience are going to be most related and relevant to the position that you're applying for. Those are the things you want to include in your body paragraph. You want to make sure that you're not generalizing. So you don't want to just say, I have over 5 years of customer service experience. You want to say, in my role as this, I did X, Y, and Z things. So you want to get specific in what role it was that you completed these tasks, and then also how that connects to the job that you're applying for. The last paragraph will be your closing paragraph, and this should be just as short as your opening paragraph. So you want the focus to be in the body. And your closing paragraph, you're just reiterating that you're a good fit. You are pointing them to the next steps. Sometimes I'll have you include your contact information again for where you can be reached, always thanking them. So say, thank you for your consideration, sincerely, your name at the bottom, and then leave a space so that way you can actually include your signature as well. So you'll have your type name and your signature right above it. Here's a sample of a cover letter so you can see the different components and how it's laid out when you're creating it. So up at the top, you'll have your contact information. So this isn't much different from what you have at the top of your resume. And then you're going to leave a couple of spaces after that and put today's date. Then you'll have a couple of more spaces, and then you're going to put the employer's contact information. So if they give you a direct name of a person to address it to, you want to put their name and their title. And then you also want to put the organization's name and their address. You want to put Dear Mr. or Ms. and the last name of the person to direct it to. If they don't give you a person, then I would at least put Dear Hiring Manager right there. And then you'll see the 3 sections that we had talked about. Your opening paragraph, the body paragraph, and then your last paragraph. And sincerely, your handwritten signature, and then your name. Congratulations, you've now learned all the essentials on how to create a solid resume and cover letter for the next job that you're applying for. If you do have any questions, or if you'd like to schedule an appointment with one of our career counselors, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us by phone at 708-235-3974 or by email at career@govst.edu. Thanks, and I look forward to working with you.